as we approach the end of the L's in our study of all the men and women of the Bible, we're at Luke, almost to Lydia. We haven't had a woman in a while, but first we're going to talk about Luke. Luke's one of my favorite people to talk about because he occupies a pretty unique position, and that position is being the only Gentile or non-Jewish writer of the books of the Bible. So he was a Gentile. He was a formerly trained medical physician. Learned that from Colossians 4:14 when Paul calls him that, basically, the good physician, who at some point became a Christian, who went with Paul on his second and third missionary campaigns, who accompanied and attended Paul in prison, and eventually wrote 2 New Testament books, Luke and Acts, making him, as I said, the only non-Jewish writer of the Bible. Well, there's another thing about that. Luke also wrote the biggest portion of the New Testament as far as the writers go. It was not Paul. Well, no, not just physically by hand, but content-wise, contents. The biggest portion of the New Testament was written by Luke because his books were so long. So you might think Paul, and this is, of course, under the assumption that Paul didn't write Hebrews, which I think is very clear that he did not. And I haven't compared otherwise. I'm assuming if you put Hebrews in Paul's list, Paul probably did write the most. But I haven't confirmed that, but that's an assumption. But as it is, Luke wrote more than Paul because Luke and Acts are lengthy books. So even though Paul wrote 13 of the 27 books, Luke wrote more words. So,
That's because all the other books have a different purpose for the Holy Spirit writing them. Luke is the only historian, the man of record, which physicians are very good at. They have to keep records. The others wrote for totally different reasons.
that is true. I'm not sure if doctors are always known as being good. I don't think all doctors would make good historians. But, okay, good record keepers. Bad handwriting, right? But good at record keeping, maybe.
It's necessary.
Good at details. They have to be good at details because in the medical field, not everything is exact, but I think as a rule, you want to be as exact as possible. And Luke is treasured as a first-class historian. Even more than, nobody can really speak to how good of a doctor he was. I'm assuming he was pretty good. But there have been people who have, put a lot of effort into investigating the books of Luke and Acts and have really come down to the conclusion that he is a top-grade historian in his own right. And I've talked in the past about a book by William Ramsey called St. Paul, the Traveler and Roman Citizen, and he set out on that book to basically set out not really respecting the books, not really believing in it even, but he came out of that thinking totally opposite, and that is thanks to Luke's writings, I would say, a lot. Anyway, I've called him, our book, I've deviated from the book that we've been using here, or the book I've been getting these handouts, turning into these handouts. I've deviated because Luke, to me, is the man of science and faith. And I say that because many times in our society, those two things are considered or I guess every person, is one or the other. I'm a man of science, you're a man of faith, and that's the difference between us, or the other way around. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I know they're not mutually exclusive. Luke he was both. He was a man of science and of faith. And anytime the gospel writers record miracles of Jesus, I find it the most fascinating to hear it from Luke because of his background. He was, especially healing, miracles of healing. That's the significance of Luke being a doctor, is when Luke when you read about a miracle of healing in the book of Luke, you're hearing it from a medical doctor that this man Jesus miraculously healed this person. And that makes it all the more powerful as testimony, because, a lot of doctors would be prone to not believe that, This is my field of expertise. I know how things work, and that just doesn't happen. Not Luke, because he believed in Jesus. It's also been said, as the handout points out, less is known of Luke than any other New Testament writer, except for Hebrews, of course. I added that part because we don't even know who he was. But, we may know some about him. We just don't know if it's him, depending on who wrote the book of Hebrews. He was a Gentile. We know that. This writer says that he was possibly the brother of Titus. I added possibly because I certainly don't think that is in any way confirmed. He's the beloved physician, not the good. I misspoke a second ago. Luke, the beloved physician. He probably made a decent living as a doctor, as doctors tend to do. That may be why he was able to travel with Paul. But he was a man of knowledge. Being a Greek-minded man, knowledge was a big deal for them. An exact observer and faithful recorder, as we said. Being exact. His gospel has been said to be the most beautiful book ever written. Some have characterized it that way, described it that way. It certainly is a great book in its own right. He records some things that the others don't. It is Luke that gives us all the background behind leading up to the births of John and Jesus. Not Matthew. He mentions a little bit of it. Mark doesn't mention any of it. John doesn't mention any of it. But Luke, all the details about the pregnancies of Elizabeth and Mary, especially Mary, and that leads me to believe that Luke talked with Mary. He interviewed Mary, got this information. That's no discredit to inspiration. Luke himself says at the beginning of Luke, "It seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you," which is Theophilus, whoever Theophilus was. So he's saying, I've done my research. I've followed these things very closely, and now I've written them down. I've made an orderly account here myself. And it's very clear when you read that a lot of that following these things closely was getting the story from Mary. So Luke sort of gives the birth of Jesus from Mary's perspective almost, because he has a lot of that information that the others just omit for, I don't know, reasons of space and whatever else. But, by the way, one other tidbit, speaking on hearing things from Luke, Luke is the only of the four gospel writers who mentions that Jesus' sweat became like drops of blood in the Garden of Gethsemane. Only Luke. And I think that is significant. It was only the doctor who told us that. So here's why I think that's important. Not because it makes it more true, but because it makes it stronger against criticism from skeptics. If Matthew had said it, Matthew was a Jewish, he was a Jew, therefore it must be filled with religious superstition and whatnot. Or if John had said it, and when I say it, I mean anything, but this is just one example. He was one of Jesus' apostles, and he was just, it was exaggerating or whatever. But no, it was the Greek doctor who is the one that said that Jesus' sweat became like drops of blood. So I find that to be significant. And any time Luke mentions that, something like that, bodily or medical or anything like that is significant, hearing it from him because of his medical background. But again, he also wrote Acts. So the entire book of Acts was written by Luke. Acts is pretty much Luke. It's like second Luke in a way, because it's written to the same person as Luke was written to. And he basically says in the first book, O Theophilus, I've dealt with all that Jesus began to do and to teach until the day when he was taken up. He presented himself alive to them after his suffering by many proofs, appearing to them during 40 days and speaking about the kingdom of God, and so on. So he begins the book of Acts by referencing the book of Luke. So it's basically the sequel to his gospel account. But where we really follow along with Luke in the book of Acts is beginning in chapter 16. And the reason for that is because that's when he hooks up with Paul and starts traveling with Paul. And we know that for a fact. And the reason we know that is because the pronouns change. He switches from they and them to we and us. In chapter 16, you've heard of the Macedonian call. That happened at Troas. I don't have a map for you. At least I don't think I do. Nope. Okay. So, no map. Sorry. Add this to the list of times when a map would have come in handy. But Troas is right on the coast of Asia Minor, northwestern coast. And apparently that's where Luke was at that time. So Paul came there, and now Luke is there with him. And you can see in verse 10, the Macedonian call begins in Acts 16, verse 6. They went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. But when they had come up to Mysia, they attempted to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas, and a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing there, urging him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And when Paul had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go into Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel. That alone already is beyond a shadow of a doubt. Luke was with them, and not that he was just with them, he was a part of their group. We immediately sought to go to Macedonia because we concluded, based on this vision, that God had called us to preach the gospel. And then from that point on, not for the rest of the book of Acts, but you can focus and see we, us, we, all the way down until occasionally you can see whenever he separated from Paul, because he starts saying them again. And so the Philippian jailer and his conversion, with Lydia, Luke's with them. But then with the jailer, Luke's not with them. And then they get back together. Let's see. In somewhere, chapter 20. So from Luke 16:12 to 20, verse 6, he apparently stayed at Philippi. Because if you remember when they went across the sea, And they met Lydia at Philippi. And then Luke doesn't get back with Paul until Paul gets back to Philippi, and then it's we us again. So it makes the latter half of the book of Acts a very interesting study to follow Luke's steps as much as following Paul's steps. But one thing that strikes us about Luke's writing is you can see how much he admired and respected Paul. And how could he not? But that's really one of the main reasons why the book of Acts mainly focuses on Paul, is because of Luke following Paul. And you can just see how much Paul must have made an impact on Luke and changed his life, really. Jesus obviously changed his life. I wish we had an account of Luke's conversion. I would love to know how that happened and how exactly that did happen. But he recorded these things. One of the most important books, arguably one of the most important books in the New Testament, it's written by Luke. And following Paul, and many times, or at least a few times, you'll read how he describes his movements. Luke will say Paul he fixed his eyes on people and gazed at them and moved with a motion of his hand, gestured with his hand, really paying attention to details and being impacted by Paul's preaching and teaching and just general behavior.
So do you think that today we would call Luke, we call him a historian, as he is. But today, in today's society, and maybe even back then, we would call him an investigative reporter. Because he is searching out, like you said, Mary. He wants to get first-hand accounts, not second-hand accounts. This is what Mary told me. I want to talk with her. I want to, And when you said that about gays, I have to say this, because it happened in this building. Speaking of that, because he saw it and he knew it was important to him. In this very auditorium, several years ago, the first time I came and Phil Sanders did a lesson here, he physically looked at everyone in this building. It took like 5 minutes. And I looked over to my friend after he looked at us and said, he thinks I have a stroke. Because he just stood there and looked at absolutely everyone in the building. And that made an impression upon me, and I tell that story to everyone. I said, that was a moment which I'd never seen before, and evidently Luke wants people to know that.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's something you don't really forget because of how unusual, for lack of a better word, that is. Not that it's wrong, it's not something you see every day in a sermon or a lesson like that. But yeah, I think he admits to being an investigative reporter. At least that seems to me what he meant when he said, and I read it from the ESV, he having followed all these things closely for some time past. And really the way before that he says, inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things, that have been accomplished among us. Other people have already done this, he says. But it seemed good to me also, since I've followed these things, all things closely. Yeah. And then when you get into the way he starts, it's like, it seems without a doubt, he spoke to these people. And he got it from them like a reporter, like a good reporter anyway, and wrote it down as he received it. And that is in addition to whatever role the Holy Spirit may have played in the way inspiration works, which is never exactly clear in the Scriptures, but we know that it is inspired of God. But how in real time that process worked, we don't really know. But they're not, again, those two things are also not mutually exclusive. Man's research and God's inspiration, yeah.
Well, I wonder, because in 16, when Paul went to Derbe and to Lystra, a disciple was already there named Timothy, the son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but his father was Because, I mean, is Luke Greek? Is that what you said he was? Could he have been one of the Greeks that was a friend of Timothy? Just wondering now.
Yeah, I don't know if that follows, just because Luke doesn't seem to have been in Lystra or Derbe. He was in Troas. So I guess it's a 50-50 chance if they knew each other before. They were clearly contemporaries. We just don't know if they met, if they knew each other before Troas or after, or not until Troas. We know they were together at Troas because Timothy went with Paul, and then Luke joins Paul and Timothy in Troas before they go to Macedonia. So Timothy, yeah, his father was a Greek, but again, we don't know where all Luke had been before this. But Luke had been telling all this story all along. But he joins the company there in chapter 16 and is actually now physically traveling. So we can be certain Acts 1 through 16 8 basically. Luke got this information the same way he got all the information for the Gospel of Luke. He probably from Paul, not Acts 1 through 9 or 1 through 8, but at least from the conversion of Paul to here, he probably got it from Paul, and he probably got the earlier parts from the same place he got the information for the Gospel of Luke. But from 16:10 onward, he starts speaking. He was a part of it. He was a part of the story now. Going with Paul, being separated from Paul, he would obviously get the information of what happened while we were separated from Paul, and that's why it follows Paul so closely. But the fact that it just sets him apart from the other Bible writers because he wasn't a Jew. He was a man of science, at least his upbringing, his training, and yet he still believed in the Lord just as much as any of the others, and including his acts of healing. And we can see, you can just feel his admiration for Paul as he writes about Paul's preaching and teaching. No doubt he benefited greatly. But we know, in 2 Timothy, Luke and Timothy probably became, close, because in 2 Timothy, right after Paul says, Demas forsook me, he says, Luke alone is with me. Only Luke's with me, which alone says a lot about Luke. Luke is the only one still here. Titus had, I sent Crescens to Galatia, or it seems that's what he means. Titus has gone to Dalmatia. Luke alone is here with me. He's the only one here. So Colossians 4:14 is where he calls him the beloved physician. So that confirmed we didn't just make up that he was a doctor. That's what Paul says he was. Which, by the way, at that time, Demas was still with Paul, because Luke, the beloved physician, greets you, as does Demas, and sadly things changed sometime between then and 2 Timothy. And then in Philemon verse 24 is the other time that we see Luke. Epaphras greets you. So do Mark, Aristarchus, Demas, and Luke, my fellow workers. So Luke was with Paul a lot, and was obviously a very valuable part of Paul's ministry. If nothing else, probably tending to him anytime he needed it. I mean, be pretty nice to have a doctor right by your side all the time. And that's what Paul had. But Luke, first and foremost, was a faithful Christian who was not afraid to be associated with Paul. His life was in danger many times, just like Paul. Right there with Paul. And he went right along with him. And I have no doubt did a lot more teaching and preaching than just what's been done from his writings. Luke probably helped in the speaking part. I think it's significant how he says that Lydia heard us. I believe he says one of the women who heard us was a woman named Lydia. So Luke was a part of this preaching and teaching ministry, a very valuable part, in addition to all of his note-taking to write this down to be preserved. Not much else we can say about Luke, honestly, other than speculations and other insights that we might have. But there's no underestimating how much he has done just by the book of Luke and Acts alone. Okay, here's some lessons we can learn from Luke. One I've already said. We'll say it again. Science and faith are not mutually exclusive. The Bible is not anti-science. I don't know where that started or who came up with that or who decided that. It's not. The same God who gave us the Bible invented science. So nobody knows science better than God, because science is the way, the study of the way the world that He created works and all the things in it work. So far from being anti-science, the Bible and true science, I'll say, always agree. There are a lot of things that are called science nowadays. It's just simply not science. But true science and the Bible always agree, and that means true science and faith. You don't have to be one or the other. You don't have to ignore true science in order to believe in God and the Bible. You do not have to do that. It's just that's not what true faith is. If you do, then it's not true faith. And if there's something that challenges your faith, it's not true science, because they go together. They're hand in hand. Number two, no matter where one comes from or where one has been, the gospel can reach the heart. Whether you grew up in Jerusalem being trained at the temple like Paul was, or whether you were a doctor somewhere, who knows where. We don't know exactly where Luke was from, but he was from the Gentile world, maybe somewhere over in Greece or Macedonia, being trained up to be a doctor. The gospel still reached him, and he was converted. Number three, our specific gifts, talents, and abilities can and should be used in God's service and to His glory. We know Luke did that. He took advantage of his education, not just for medical purposes, but I have no doubt that he did use his medical expertise. Surely at some point, Paul, we're talking about a man who was stoned to death. He just refused to die from it. I bet he needed some help after that, probably in a lot of pain. And I have a feeling Luke had a lot to do with whatever help he received, and not to mention how many times he said he was beaten with rods so many times, and all those things in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, maybe, somewhere around there. So it should be with us too. My specific gifts and talents and abilities may be different from yours, but no matter what they are, I can use them for God's service and to His glory. Now, that doesn't mean that every time I'm using them, it's automatically to God's glory, because that's not true. A lot of times we use our gifts and abilities for our own glory, or in a way that's not in accordance with God's will, at which point it's not to God's glory, even if I mean it to be. And number 4, Never underestimate the impact of attaching oneself to truly devoted people of God. There's no doubt, Luke's faith and walk, Christian walk, was greatly enhanced and strengthened by joining himself to Paul. No question, no doubt about it. He would have become a much better man, much better Christian by joining himself to Paul and Silas and Timothy and those other Christian men. And that holds true today too. The impact, and the reverse is also true. The impact of attaching yourself to ungodly people. The impact is immense. It's one of those things that, growing up, we never wanted to believe it. It's just something that your stupid parents told you because they didn't have any clue how the world worked, and you can't believe how stupid somebody can be. And then it turns out they were right. And at some point we learn that they were right all along. But yes, who you associate with definitely affects you and leads you in one direction or the other. And thankfully, Luke joined himself to Paul and these others. He could have been a Christian without being with Paul and Timothy and Silas. Absolutely. There were plenty of Christians like that. But, he could have also joined himself to other groups, like Peter earlier on anyway, and the other apostles or other faithful Christians, and had another great impact in his life. But the key is godly, devoted people. That's why it's important whenever we become Christians that we join ourselves to the disciples, because it's not only obeying the gospel and being baptized into Christ that makes us, and then we're free to whatever. Who we join, who we attach ourselves to, makes a difference. Will make or break. We need to be sure that we are joined with God's people as we begin our Christian walk, or else we're putting our own lives in jeopardy spiritually. Probably could be plenty of other things we take from Luke, but certainly two books of the Bible that are very worthy of just studying on their own. If you're ever thinking of, I want to start reading somewhere, hey, why not just take a little time, read Luke and Acts as sort of one unit, and you'll be amazed just how much is in there. Like I said, most words, not of any book of the Bible, but New Testament wise, most words of any. This Gentile Greek medical doctor. Thoughts? Comments? Questions?
I know you said speculation about a lot of things, but I don't wonder if the reason I said, when you're talking about how much Bible he'd written, the New Testament he'd written, I said this physical hand, is that,
Yeah.
did he actually do some of the writing for Paul?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I think on only one occasion does the stenographer, for lack of a better word, reveal himself. That's in Romans. Tertullus, I think, is his name. Just out of nowhere. Tertullus wrote this. When Paul wasn't looking, he scribbled that in there like real quick. Make sure he got that in there. As far as the others, yeah, Luke could have been one of them. Absolutely. He was probably, as long as he could read his handwriting, It's probably why the handwriting's so bad. Yeah. Yeah, no doubt.
Even though that God refused to give them of it, so that it use medical.
Yeah, maybe that's why Paul was even more willing to go into danger, because I got Luke with me, so if the Lord needs me, I'll survive, and then I've got Luke with me to stitch me up. I don't know. All right, well, Luke serves as a good example for all of us, not only in homework, doing your homework, research, investigation. We should do the same. We can't investigate the actual players that play a part like he could, like Mary and Elizabeth and whoever else, but we can investigate his writings. We can investigate the other scriptures, and we ought to take advantage and never take advantage of the blessing of having the scriptures at our disposal 24/7 at all, whenever we want. And we have no excuse for not knowing them at this point in history.